it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini. This is the second and last video in my Gracie saddlebag tutorial series. If you need to start with part 1, be sure to use the link in the description box below. And now we move on to the fun part, which is constructing the outer body piece of the Gracie bag. So we're going to grab our two outer pieces here and the gusset. All right, so to start clipping these together, I typically will fold the gusset in half just so I can find the center mark. Okay, and I'll mark it just on both sides. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing to the body piece here. And I'm just marking the halfway mark on the curved edge because that's the bottom where the gusset meets. Same thing to the other outer panel. All right, so now the importance of those center marks is that you have a guide on where to line up the center of the gusset with the bottom here. So even if you do, for some reason, get the fabric to move on you or something, you want the excess to be extended past the top so that the curve of both the gusset and the outer panel is evenly distributed. All right, so we are going to line it up center to center first. So I'm matching up my center marks. I'm going to turn it this way so that I can put a clip on here. And then I'm just going to work my way around, matching the raw edges. And notice that we've lined up the gusset and the fabric with pretty sides touching. And you can see that the measurement, it looked like it was going to be a little bit shorter. But once you put them together, it ends up, it should be exact if you've cut it to the right dimensions. You see? I have a perfect matchup at the end. So beginning and end, and it matches perfectly. So we are going to sew the gusset one side at a time. So this is all you can do for right now. We're going to head over to the sewing machine, and we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can adjust the seam allowance however, feels most comfortable for you and what you can fit bulk-wise in your machine. But I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around the curve, back stitching at the beginning and at the end. All right, so we've sewn the first side on. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing to the opposite side. And for this one, again, I'm just going to take the piece that I've already sewn, flip it on top of this one, match up the center portions here, and grab my clips so that I can also clip these two layers of the bag in place. Now we head back to the sewing machine and sew this seam. Same thing, 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and end. All right, so now that the outer portion has been pieced together like this, you can set this aside. And what you just did here, I want you to go ahead and repeat that to your lining pieces. So you should have 2, and they all should have interfacing on them. Now, one thing to note when you are sewing these together in the lining pieces, you're going to do the same thing by measuring in half here, measuring in half, and then pinning or clipping the edges together for sewing. What I would do is use a larger seam allowance than what you used here. That will help the lining lay nice and flat on the inside of the bag after it's all put together. So if, for example, here we use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm probably going to use about a 5/8 inch seam allowance on the lining. And it's going to be sewn exactly the same. It's just instead of a 1/4 inch, I'm going to go in a little bit more so that the lining is a little bit smaller than the outside portion of the bag. That'll give it a nice, cleaner finish on the inside. So again, measure everything in half and then sew these together just like we did the outer parts. Now on one of these lining sides, we're going to have to leave an opening, okay? So we can flip the whole thing right side out through. So you can decide to do it on the first seam that you're sewing or on the second. In this case, I think I'm going to do it on this one. So I'm going to start here, backstitch. I'm going to come down somewhere to like around here. And then I'm going to leave a chunk here open. And then I'll pick up back here, okay, to continue that. And I'll leave myself somewhat of a space. You can either decide to leave it on more of the side of the curve, or just like a bigger piece all across the bottom. Remember, this is going to be in the lining, so it's, I mean, even if it's not super perfect, it's just going to be on the inside bottom of the bag, so nobody's really going to see it. So I'm starting off with a bigger seam allowance here with my 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to stop right there. I'll give myself a big chunk here to skip. And I'll pick up somewhere down here. All right, so our lining has been sewn together, all right, to the gusset. And remember that you have to have some type of an opening somewhere in the lining here. So we have that, the outer, and the flap. Now, before we can start moving on to the next step, we want to go in and install the female end of the snap, because that's going to go on one of these sides here on the outer portion of the bag. And the reason I like to do it now is because I've taught enough beginners to know that if you mark it before you sew the gusset together, sometimes things can get a little bit lopsided. And once you install that snap, there's really no way to go back on it because you've cut a hole right through the outer portion of the bag. So if your seam allowance is a little uneven, you know, you can kind of trim this off here, make it so that it's workable. And then at this point, you have the shape of the bag completed, okay? So now we'll go in and install the female end of our snap. So if you want to, you can go ahead and flip this right side out for a better visual of what the bag is going to look like finished. All right, and then decide which one of these sides you want to be the front of the bag. That's your first step. So here or here. And I think I'm going to go with this side, okay, as the front of my bag. And so imagine our flap is going to be connected back there, and it's going to flip down onto here to close. That tells me that I need to install the snap somewhere here. Now for installing the female end of the snap here, this is personal preference. And really, you kind of have to look at the bag and think, how much stuff do you typically carry if you're wanting to turn this into your everyday bag or not? If you want the top to kind of get squished down and you want the flap to come further down, then you know you're obviously going to want to set the snap further down. If you want to leave enough space up here so that you can really stuff the bag, then you can install the snap so that it closes higher up. So personal preference, you just want to make sure that it's centered, because remember, we were careful to make sure that the installation on the flap here was nice and centered. And so we want to do the same thing. Otherwise, they're not going to snap together if they're not in line with one another. So let me move this out of the way. Grab it at the two seams here and just fold the top edge. Match the seams, so we're finding just the center point of this one. Okay, so there's my center point. And now from there, you can even double check it to make sure it's in line with the other one. And that looks pretty good. So from that center mark, then you want to measure down however far down you want it to close up. So I think, and I'm just eyeballing this here, I think I'm going to set it to close at around 3.5 inches. So I'm going to, keeping in line straight down and straight across the top also, because this is a 90-degree angle of my ruler so that I know that this line is coming straight down. 1, 2, 3, 3.5. I'm going to make a little mark. And I'm making like a little plus sign so I know right where the intersection is. And that is where I want to install this female end. Again, we're going to take the washer, and I'm just going to do it from the front here, but the washer obviously is going to go in the back. But we're going to put the little circle right in the center of the crosshairs. And then with my marking pen, I'm just going to mark the two slits so I know where to insert my seam ripper and make those cuts. now although this is going to be on the back of foam here, I'm still going to go ahead and cut out another little piece of foam. The same way that we did it to install the other part. I just put this there, mark the 2 slits. I'm going to make the little cuts, slip it over. Now from the inside, I'm just going to slip this over like that. Then we'll put the washer on it like that. And then again, either with pliers or your fingers or whatever, press those prongs out. All right, once you have that, you can flip it out. Should be nice and centered and properly installed. At this point, I usually like to just snap them together so I can make sure that nothing is too out of place or too crooked or anything, and it looks pretty good, nice and centered. I like that I still have enough of a chunk of this fabric that shows even when the bag is going to be closed. And this is going to be caught in this back seam. So yeah, I really like the look of that. So now let's move on to the next step. Now for the next step, we're going to go ahead and make these little fabric loops that are going to house the D-rings that are then going to connect our adjustable straps. So pick out whatever fabric you're going to be using for these 2 little loops, and we're going to work on these next. All right, for the loops, I've cut out 2 rectangles here of the fabric I want to use. This is my little palm print. I love it with this aqua and aqua color. You're going to lay them in front of you vertically. Now, they measure 2.5 inches this way by 3.5. So line them up like this, pretty side of the fabric face down. We're going to fold it up in half, and I'm just going to crease it here to create that center crease line. Then you're going to open it and bring in the edges to meet that crease line. Okay, on both sides. And then, as you probably have done this before, is refold it on that initial center crease. Hit it with your iron. You can even glue base that so that it doesn't move on you and it stays shut. Couple dots. And you're going to repeat that to the other one. Now we're going to take these to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch really close to both of the long edges on both of these strips. Now we can grab our D-rings and we're going to slip one of the fabric strips through the flat side of the D-ring and bring it together so that the raw edges of the strip are touching. And then we're going to top stitch super close to this raw edge here, and you're going to repeat that to the other one as well. Now we're going to take the outer part of our bag and we're going to come here to the side gusset and we're going to put one on each side. You can measure here to make sure that you're centering it exactly where it needs to be, but I find that the piece is not that big, so it's pretty easy to eyeball it. One thing that I do is to extend the raw edges of the fabric strip here, the little loop, past the top edge. And that way, when you start to sew everything together, you can make sure that you're catching all the layers versus trying to line it up like this. Sometimes it'll move on you and you'll only catch a little bit of it. You don't want to run into that issue. So center it, extend it past a little bit, and you can put a pin or a clip, whatever you feel like using. And if you're right at the sewing machine like I am, then I will probably skip the pinning and just hold it in place and stitch it there. Make sure that you're only stitching through the gusset and the fabric strip. So separate it out so you're only sewing through these layers. Make sure that it's nice and centered. Extend it past, and then we're just going to baste these 2 together super close to the edge. Okay? And I'm going to repeat the same thing to the opposite side of the bag. Now the next step is to flip the outer part so you're looking at the front where the magnetic snap is, and you're going to take your flap and you're going to orient it the way that it would be if you open the bag. So if I open the bag, let me see when I close it, the magnetic snap should be here, and this is how it's going to close. So flip it back on itself like this, and this is where you're going to sew the raw edge of the flap to the raw edge of the back of the bag. So line them up so that your seams are matching up on the sides here, and you can put some clips or pins. And you're going to sew about 1/8 of an inch just from here to here, back stitching at the beginning and ends. At this point, we're ready to start installing the lining with the outer part of the bag that we just completed. So what I like to do first, because we use the larger seam allowance, is to take some pinking shears and reduce the seam allowance here, cutting really nice and close to that seam line. Make sure that you're not cutting into the actual lining. You're just trimming away the excess bulk in the lining seam allowance. And when you get around to where the opening is, do not trim there, because you'll need that to turn that seam allowance inside. Now, you're going to want to have the lining just like I have here with the pretty side on the inside. So it should be wrong side out. And then you want the outer portion of your bag to be pretty side out. We're going to take the outer part of the bag and slip it inside the lining. Now remember, for the lining, we use a smaller seam allowance. So it's going to be smaller, obviously. And it's quite a lot to fit in here because of the bulk of the foam stabilizer. But it is definitely doable. All right. Just slide it in there and just work the edges so that you're lining up the gusset seam lines of the lining with the gusset seam lines of the outer part as well. Now make sure that on the sides here that you are slipping the D-rings inside. They should be sandwiched in, and the same goes for the flap. Everything should be pushed inside. The only thing around the outer edge should be the lining fabric. All right, so at this point, don't be too worried about what it looks like in there. Remember, we have a ton of foam and that's the bulk of it. As long as this top edge is nice and smooth, that's the part that we need it to be smooth, because that's where the actual stitching will be. The rest of it, we'll turn it out through our opening in the lining and we'll work it all out at the end. So for now, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna use 1/4 inch. If you feel comfortable using a larger seam allowance, you can do that as well. But I'm going to stitch around the entire top opening, making sure to backstitch on the, over the little loops where we have our D-rings, because that's where the weight of the bag is going to be on the strap. And then at the beginning and at the ends. I just want to make sure that everything is nice and secure. And now let's reach into the opening carefully and flip the entire bag right side out. At this point, you just push everything out, make sure all the seams are pushed out, have a look and see, make sure that you caught everything and you don't have to go back in. I kind of just lift on the lining like this, make sure everything looks good on the sides. And then you just need to close this up. Now you can stitch up this opening by hand if you want to, but because it's going to be on the inside lining, I typically just come to the sewing machine and stitch it shut, okay? And because the opening here is on a curve, it's not going to lay super perfectly for you unless you really take your time to make sure that that seam is curving. So I don't stress it too much. I'm just going to stitch close to the outer edge in a curve motion. All right, now we push the lining in and take it to the ironing board so we can give this whole thing a really, really good press. After you give it a good press, go ahead and put some clips here so that you can hold that lining inside the bag like that. And then we're going to top stitch it. Now, because of the flap, and the flap is coming out here in the seam, you're not going to top stitch across this back edge. What I want you to do is basically just start here at this seam, take just a couple back stitches, and you're going to top stitch all the way from the back of the gusset around the front part, and you're going to end at the back of the gusset again. So you're not top stitching across here, because remember, we need this to remain kind of flexible here. And if you top stitch it, you're going to kind of stiff it into place, or you're going to have it down so it's going to be even harder. You're going to have to go against the seam to close the bag, all right? So we're just top stitching from the back of the gusset on one side, across the top front edge, and then to the back as well. So I like to top stitch it from the pretty side so I can try and make sure that it's nice and straight line and it's going to look the best on the side that's going to be on the outside of the bag. When you get to the point of the D-rings here, you don't want to leave them down. You want to kind of extend them up and top stitch it so that it's sticking up, because remember the strap is going to go connected here. We want these hanging up. Sometimes it helps to push the lining in when you press it and set the clips, and then you can remove them as you go so nothing else comes out and moves on you. Okay, so our top stitching is complete. Give it a good press if you need to around all the sides. And that looks really good so far. All we have left to do is to make and attach our adjustable shoulder strap. So let's grab the fabric that we're going to use for that and get right to it. Now let's move on to making our adjustable crossbody strap. So I have the fabric, it's folded the same way it comes off the bolt. The selvages are up this way. I've already trimmed a little bit off so I have a nice clean straight edge here, and we are going to cut out 2 strips that are 4 inches wide. Next we're going to trim off the selvages because we don't want that in our strap. And now we're going to combine these two by sewing them together to get one long continuous strip. So put one of them in front of you vertically, pretty side of the fabric face up. Then you're going to take the other one and put it pretty side facing down, perpendicular to this first one. And I want you to match up the edges here. Now we'll head over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew from the top right corner to the bottom left corner where this top strip matches or meets up with the bottom strips. All right, so this has been sewn. You can't see it because I used gray thread, but trim away the excess here, this little triangular corner, about 1/4 inch away from the seam. So we have that. We'll press it, and then I like to press the seam open when I'm combining strips. So you can see when you open it up, nice continuous strip. Now you're going to take your strip and lay it on your ironing board with the pretty side face down. We're going to fold it in half lengthwise like this to give ourselves a center crease line, and you're going to do that the entire length of the way. Now at this point, if your strip is way too long, you may want to trim it down. I find that I work well with, so that I can use the purse either as crossbody or just over one shoulder when the strip here is 60 inches in length. So trim it down if you want to the 60 inches in length, or if you prefer a longer one, you can add more to that or just keep it as it is. All right, I've cut mine down to the 60 inches. First, I'm going to fold in the short ends here. Just give it a little press. You can use your basting glue also. Put a couple of drops there if you want to help that stay down. And you're going to do that on the other end when we get to it. But I'm going to start right here by bringing up these long edges in to meet the center crease line. And for this, I definitely will use the basting glue because it's a lot longer of a strip. That just helps keep everything nice and flat and in place for you. Remember to turn this in so we have no raw edges. And you're going to flip the strip over and you're going to repeat the same thing on the other side. So bring up this edge in towards that center crease line and glue baste it to set it nice and flat. Now once you've done that, the entire length of the strip, what's left to do is to fold it on the initial crease line and give it a press. Then you can head over to the sewing machine and top stitch on both long edges. But here's one step that sometimes I like to do, depending on the style of the bag and how I'm going to use it. I've cut some strips of my woven interfacing to just 3/4 inches wide, and I'm going to lay it with the fusible side down, just somewhere there, and just press it into place. This doesn't add much, but it's going to add just a little bit more kind of stiffness and body to the strap. And these don't have to be continuous. You don't have to sew these together or anything. Just bump them up next to each other. It's just so that the stabilizer is caught there before I fold it over and top stitch it. All right. Now I'll go back and do what I said. Put some glue right here, a couple dots, a little stream, and then fold it on itself and press it. And once I'm done doing this to the whole strip, we'll head over to the sewing machine to top stitch. Alright, so we're done top stitching that. I'm just going to give it a good press real quick. Set those stitches. Alright, so now we're moving on to the last and final step, and that is on attaching the adjustable shoulder strap so that you can complete your Gracie saddle bag. So to get started with this, once you have your strap done, you're going to grab your 1-inch slider, and the first thing you're going to do is actually take one end, okay? And I just like to orient it like this. So I have the bag in front of me. I'm going to come over here to the right-hand side, and I'm going to slip the strap in from the outside towards the inside. And I'm just going to bring this over onto itself, and I'm just going to stitch this in place. So you can do a box with one diagonal, or you can stitch an entire box and stitch 2 diagonals, like a big X in the center, just for some extra reinforcement. So that is the first step. So I'm just going to put a pin right here. So I like to just take it over to the sewing machine all at once and do it all at the same time. So I know that that is going to be stitched onto itself. Now I kind of walk my hands here, making sure that there's no twists like this, okay, in my strap. So I'm just walking it nice and smooth. Make sure it's nice and flat all the way, all the way. And now with this end, I'm going to take my slider and I'm going to loop it through the top one from behind forward, and then bring this down like this, okay? Now this same end, I'm going to do the same thing that we did on the other side, come from the outside in this way. So I'm going from the outside of the D-ring that's already on the bag to this way, okay? And just slide it up, give yourself some working room, all right? So do you see how this is facing? That should be the outside part versus that. So it should be like this, coming from the outside towards the inside, and then the end of this here, we're going to slip it up and over this. So to do that, one helpful tip is to push back on this. So you see it creates a gap here, and it makes it a little bit easier to slip this in and then bring it back out. Okay, now the end here is obviously the part that needs to be secured. So this is going to come down onto itself. And that's why I tell you, give yourself some working room, because you'll have to move all this away just so that you can stitch this down onto itself. And we'll stitch again the box with one diagonal or the box with an X in it just for some extra reinforcement. Make sure that you give yourself some leeway here so that you can maneuver it so that you're only placing this bit that needs to be sewn under the presser foot of your sewing machine. So let me put a pin right here, and then we'll head over to the sewing machine to stitch both of these down. All right, and now that we have reinforced that strap, you can see how it works. Everything is smooth. I make sure that there are no twists, so that's good. And then it is adjustable here by basically pulling on the slider and readjusting the overall length of your strap here. All right, so it can be a shoulder bag or a crossbody bag. All right, and that is it for the Gracie saddlebag tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed learning how to make this super cute and easy everyday purse. If you enjoyed the video tutorial, make sure to hit it with the thumbs up below. Share it across the different social media sites with your crafty friends. And don't forget to click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Remember that I also have several other online courses for different styles of handbags and some of my other designs. I'll leave you with a link in the description box below on where you can sign up for those courses, either individually or lumped together in clubs of 5 different handbag courses. Remember that when you create handbags using my patterns and my video courses, you can sell the handbags at your local craft shows, you can open up your own online shop, or you can also make them for yourself and to give as gifts. You never lose access to the course content, so if you don't have time to make the projects now, no big deal. Whenever you get around to doing it, you know that you can always log into your account and the videos and printable instructions will be right there for you to access. So thanks again for watching this video. I hope that you will give it a try and I will see you in the next video.